Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Gray Area Podcast. On episode 104, I was able to interview Zoe Nowicki, a two-time national wrestling champion. She tells her story and she talks about, what made her into the woman that was capable of such feats. For anyone that loves the content, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this, and enjoy. All right, another podcast from the Michigan Institute of Athletics in Brighton, Michigan. It's going to be a great podcast today. I'm very excited about this one. Right before I get into it, I want to shout out VetLife. VetLife is a 501c3 nonprofit company. It's a company of veterans for veterans. Every veteran faces difficulties when they transition from active duty back to civilian life, and VetLife is there to ease that transition. If you want to reach out to VetLife, you can do so through Instagram or Facebook, or check out their website at vetlifetoday.org. So without further ado, I want to introduce Zoe Nowicki. Zoe, I'm super excited to do this podcast with you today because I know about who you are. I know what you've done. I know some of the amazing accolades and credentials you've acquired in your career, but I don't really know you at all as a person. So I feel like this is going to be, a lot of a learning process. And as your new coach, as we go into MMA, this is exciting for me. So I want to start it the way that I start all my podcasts. I want to take it all the way back. Were you born and raised here in Michigan? What were you like as a little kid? What was the family life like? Like really kind of shape for me what the early ages were like for you and how you start to, build to the woman that you are today.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Coldwater, Michigan. It's like an hour and a half from here. As a child, I grew up on a farm around horses basically my whole life. Just with a bunch of animals. I started riding horses when I was like 5, so I just spent a lot of time on the farm, like a tough farm girl. My parents were together for most of my young childhood. They got divorced when I was like 11, but just had a pretty like normal family life, mom and dad and then a little brother.
So you're the oldest?
I'm the oldest, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Got it. You're the oldest. You're kind of leading the way. What's the age difference between you and your brother?
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, so not too bad. We were like best friends.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's huge. So you were friends growing up because there's one of two things. Brothers and sisters are either rivals and they constantly clash, or they get along really well and they're like a protector for each other. So you had that dynamic.
Yeah, and we had our fights and we had our bickering and stuff, but I mean overall we were like best friends. So
what were the first couple sports that you got into? Because I know you as an athlete. You're super athletic. You crush your goals and you have all the work ethic and the things that come from athletics. What was the first sport you got into, and would you say that shaped a lot of your personality, or where does your personality come from? Like where does the hard work, did that get acquired over time, etc.?
So when I look back, I'm really surprised I got into sports actually, because I did dance when I was little and soccer when I was little, like every little girl, and I hated it. I remember being little and hating it and crying before I went to dance, and then I'd be playing soccer and I'd be like crying in the middle of the field when snack time. So yeah, but then I got into riding horses. I absolutely loved that, and that was all I did for a long time. And then I got into softball, and I would say that was my first sport that I loved was softball. And then I remember wanting to start football, and I started football when I was in the 7th grade. And so those were the first two sports.
Before we dig into those a little bit, do you know why you hated dance or why you were really against soccer as a young kid? Like, what was it about them that you didn't like?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, honestly. I just don't think I was built for dance ever. Soccer, I think I was just a lazy little kid, to be honest. Like, that's all I can think. So
you just didn't want to go out on the field and have to run around a bunch. Your heart really wasn't in it. Yeah. You didn't really see the point in it.
Yeah.
Who put you into dance and soccer? Was it your dad that put you in both? Was it your mom that was pushing you towards one? Like, where was the influence to join those sports?
Yeah, I believe it was my mom. I think they just wanted me to be active. Like, I don't feel like they ever really pushed me super hard or anything. They just wanted me to be active, and they're like, you're going to, exercise. So
what was it about horses? Because I could tell as soon as you started saying, I was really into horses, you even kind of like lit up, like it's obvious that you had a passion for that or that you were drawn to that. What was it about working with horses?
So my dad grew up racing horses, and I think that was a big thing because he would talk about horses. I watched him watch like horse racing, and I was always like that little girl who grew up like wanting to play with horses and go riding, and so yeah.
So your dad's passion kind of spilled over into you in that way. And I've met your dad a couple times. He's an extremely passionate guy. It looks like you two have an ultra type bond. Did you have that strong of a bond throughout your childhood? Did that develop more later? Like, explain to me the relationship that you had with your father and your mother when you were young.
Yeah, so I had a really good relationship with both my parents. Things kind of got different after the divorce, but I've always had a good relationship with my dad. I've always been like a daddy's girl, I guess you could say. I grew up going to the farm with him. He was my softball coach. When I started wrestling, he was at every wrestling practice, just rolling around in the room with us. And then I just grew up living mostly with him. So
he was super engaged in your childhood.
Oh, yeah.
He was really making sure to be there for you,
Yep.
which is that's a massive influence, and that's a good influence on a young child. So what was it about softball or, when you got back into sports that was different? Why, when you went back into athletics, when you were young, you're like, soccer, dance, forget this. But then softball was a lot different for you. Do you think it was a part of the maturity? You're in middle school now. Kind of take me to that chapter of your life. We're getting to the middle-aged school. What was different about athletics?
Yeah, I think I was definitely more just mature. And it was fun. My uncle was my coach for softball, like starting out, and so that was fun. He was just a fun guy. He knew how to make softball a good time for everybody. Everyone wanted to be on his team. And I think having horses really made me realize hard work, and that hard work is important, and that I like being outside. So that's why I liked softball a lot.
So your personality started changing. So
Yeah,
all of a sudden, you weren't just the lazy kid anymore that was like, I got to go to practice. You started being like, wow, if I give my best to something, this can be enjoyable. So you start playing softball. Where in the world does wrestling come into the picture? Because that's a major jump from the little girl that didn't really want to dance or play football. Wrestling is like the most intense, hands-on. And generally, I mean, it's changing. It's not as much as it was before, but generally, men wrestle. Women's wrestling finally is getting the recognition it deserves, and you're one of the people like leading the force of that in Michigan. But back when you were younger, it was nowhere near even the level that it is today. Where did wrestling come from?
People ask me that question a lot, and I don't really know. So I started playing football. I loved football a lot.
So football came before wrestling.
It was like a year before wrestling, yeah. And I don't even remember why I wanted to start football, but I remember sitting at the dinner table with my mom and my grandma and my uncle, and I was like, I want to play football. And everyone was like, you want to play football? Besides my mom. My mom's like, yeah, that would be so cool if you played football, right? So I played football. I loved it. And then my dad tried getting my brother into wrestling the next year, and I would come and watch the practices because my dad drove him, and so I'd just hang out with them. And I saw there was a girl there wrestling, and I was like, hey, I want to try this. So, and no one wanted me to wrestle, absolutely no one. I didn't realize my dad didn't want me to wrestle, but he told me later on, he's like, I didn't want you to wrestle. And my mom was like, well, it'd be cool if you played football because, you're wearing pads and stuff, but wrestling, what? No, that's just not fair.
So you didn't really run into a barrier of entry from your family when you went, when you were interested in football. I was expecting the response that your mom was like, no, girls don't play football. You got the opposite. Your mom was like, yeah, you should do that. That would be awesome. That's really cool to have that type of support system. But it was different with wrestling. Mom and dad were both kind of like, oh, girls don't wrestle, because that was kind of the mindset. A lot of people felt that like girls don't wrestle. Even though some did, it was extreme outliers.
Yeah.
There was only one girl on the wrestling team that you went out for. Is that what you said?
There was actually two, but it was a youth program. So it was, 3 years old up to 8th grade. It wasn't.
Got it.
I mean, that's a lot more popular.
So where did you go to school?
Coldwater High School.
Coldwater High School.
Yeah.
You go out for the wrestling team. What age are you when you decide to make this transition?
I was 11. I was in the 6th grade. So actually I went to private school up until 4th grade, and then I was homeschooled up until 8th grade. So it was just like a club team. Yeah.
Got it. So you say, hey, I'm going to go wrestle. When you're on a club team, are you still going to compete? Are there still events that you're going to?
Yeah, it was my way.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. So you start wrestling. give me your first impressions if you can even remember, like, because you're the girl that has played football. You obviously have a sense of self. You have self-confidence, which actually right before we talk about your impressions in wrestling, where's that self-confidence coming from? How's this little Zoe going, I'm going to play football, I'm going to go smash these guys, because you're obviously playing against the men, right? Mm-hmm. So where does that self-confidence come from? And then I want you to try to talk about like when you first start wrestling, the first couple practices, because it's one of the most intense sports out there, what it was like for you.
Mm-hmm. Football made me really confident. So I was nervous at first, but I was really good at football when I was in middle school. I was a starter. I was like one of the fastest, like all the boys, just they weren't developed yet. So I was like at the same level. So I think that gave me a lot of confidence going into wrestling. But I remember starting wrestling and I was really nervous. Like my first practice, I was wrestling with another girl, so it helped. But I remember my first practice, we were drilling duck unders. I was super nervous. They made us go live the first day, and I had no clue what I was doing. And I don't really remember anything past that the first year besides I was horrible. I won one match from a headlock, but I was really bad. I remember looking back at pictures, and, I was definitely not mature. And I'm like, I don't know how I got through that, because I remember those being like the hardest practices of my life. So.
And you know what's ironic? Helen Maroulis, her first year of wrestling, only won one match. Mm-hmm. Right as you said that popped in my head, because I've done a lot of research on her. I was amazed by what she did. And I think she's the only woman ever to win a gold for USA. But she said the same thing. She made a deal with her father that was, if I can win one match, you have to let me keep wrestling. And she ended up winning one match her first year. What did that feel like after? Because when you do things that are extremely difficult, like when you do things where success comes quick and then you're having success, it doesn't really mean a lot to you. It doesn't affect you in the same way. You're wrestling, it's super hard. You're in this environment that you don't really know what you're doing. You're probably getting wrecked every practice by the people that already wrestled, but you're battling, you're leveling up, you're trying to get better at this difficult thing. Do you remember when you got your first victory, what that was like?
Yeah, I do. I remember getting my hand raised, and I remember signing because back then you had to like sign a piece of paper and like take it to the head table. So I remember doing that, and my dad and my mom being so excited for me, and I'm pretty sure my brother was excited for me too, but...
Were you guys wrestling on the same team, by the way, you and your brother?
Yeah, yep.
Got it. What weight class did you start wrestling?
When I was in middle school, I think it was like 119 or something like that, yeah.
Got it. So you win that match, the season ends, for sure you're going to go back out the next year? Like, did wrestling... grab a hold of you at that point where you're like, listen, I'm going to be a wrestler? Or is this a progression that happens over time?
Actually, no, it was a progression. I remember wrestling being my least favorite sport. I'm like, I did it to stay in shape for football. Like, I love football. I didn't like it, but then my next year when I went out, I was doing really, really well. And, like, I think I made it to my way state. So that was a big deal then. I was like, oh, my second year. Like, I sucked last year and this year. And I won a tournament that year. It was like a novice tournament, so you had to only be wrestling for 2 years. But that was when it kind of started to take off. And then my coach, Brent Harvey, he was the women's coach, and he reached out, and he was like, there's a women's team. Like, you should come be a part of it. And then from there, just...
That was all like the War of the Roses, and I used to have a bunch of meetings with Brent. He had come in here and coached some practices, and he was that guy poured his heart and soul into wrestling. Both of his daughters were great wrestlers. So I'm literally fascinated as you're telling this story, because I know you as this incredible wrestler and this passionate woman that, smashes all these goals. But wrestling wasn't even, it was kind of like, this is just me staying in shape for what I really love, which is football. Mm-hmm. So then you go back out for football after wrestling. Does it feel the same? Do you enjoy it just as much? And why do you start getting away from football then? And then when in your life does the page turn where wrestling kind of becomes it for you? Because there's no way you've got to where you are now with the level that you're at without wrestling really being like your passion, what you're going all in on. Explain that transition for me.
Yeah, so I really liked football my first 2 years I did it. And then when I got into 8th grade, I started, I was with a different group of people, like the age group changed, and they just didn't, I don't know, they were kind of like stuck up football people, and they were like, oh, a girl on the team. And I still started and stuff, but I didn't like the people I was playing with. Like, I didn't like my teammates. I didn't like the boys on the team. And that I really stopped loving football like my freshman year. People started, hitting puberty, and I was nervous for every single practice. I couldn't go to practice without, wanting to vomit before practice. So I really started to love wrestling that second year I was wrestling, and I was good. I'm like, oh, I have potential to be good at this. And then when I got into women's tournaments and I was, doing really well against the women, and then learning more about that colleges were starting women's programs, and that was when my passion really developed. And I remember my seventh or eighth grade year, I started like cutting weight and really, getting into it and what you would call passionate, I guess. And then it was all learning from there. But.
So what do you think was yielding the success that you were having? For you to be in your second year and already start winning tournaments and doing well, what was it about you that was allowing you to climb through the ranks so quickly? You're wrestling at a club team. You don't. So it's not like you had the best coaches in the area. You had this, that, and the other thing. But you start to rise the ranks. Why were you? What was making you excel? What about you? Was it your work ethic? Was it what was it that was allowing you to climb through the ranks quickly? And then into high school, how did wrestling change?
I think I was just really persistent. My parents were the type of parents that was like, you're not going to quit something in the middle of the season, so I had to finish the season if I started it. And I had really supportive coaches. I remember I still talk to my youth coaches. And then my dad was there all the time, and he was supporting my brother and I through it. My parents were just very supportive of my wrestling. So I think it was just all the support I have, because I know girls that didn't have support starting off, and they're still kind of like in this stagnant, like they're not really going anywhere, and it's not their fault. It's just they don't have the support.
So you had amazing people around you. People around you, and you experienced some success. So that second year probably felt amazing after the first year of winning, only one match. Now all of a sudden you're winning a tournament. You're feeling better about yourself. You're grinding. Your parents, it sounds like, really flipped a switch.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like they made a huge jump from where they were initially on wrestling to like now they're probably stoked to see their little girl go out and wrestle. Mm-hmm. And then that's got to feel great. You have them in the stands probably going nuts. And are you and your brother wrestling at all the same tournaments and competing together? So wrestling basically is coming into the household. It's like, because wrestling families, obviously. Mm-hmm. Did it really start to become a part of your family? Like you guys were always fired up for the wrestling tournaments. You were going as a family. You're excited for the team. You're excited to see your brother compete. You're going to compete. Was that the case?
Yeah, we were pretty much at all the same tournaments. I don't think there was any tournaments that we weren't at together until he was in middle school and I went to high school. That divide happened. So yeah, we have wrestling mats in our living room now, and a big throwing dummy, and yeah. So when we were in high school, we would wrestle in the middle of the living room. And
that's awesome. That's exactly what I started to picture. I started to say, you know what? I bet your wrestling started coming into the household. It wasn't something you went and did. Mm-hmm. It was who you are, right? Mm-hmm. You are a wrestler, and then that spills over into everything. So talk me through high school. Was wrestling the only sport you end up playing in high school then? And how do you really start to get to the level of success that you have, because you won a national tournament in high school. Mm-hmm. Build me up to that point. At what point did you go all in on wrestling? When does that switch flip where you like, this is what I'm going to do, and then start to talk about the success, what yielded the success, the most influential coaches, training partners, whatever it was? How did you get to being a national champion?
Yeah. So my 8th grade year was when I really started to love wrestling, and I'm serious about this. I was already thinking about college as an 8th grader, and then I kind of had that bad relationship with food and developed eating disorder, and that kind of took me back for a minute. I'm I don't really know how much I like wrestling, but can I do this forever? And I was yeah, but I'm gonna keep pushing. I love wrestling.
Can you talk about that period if you're comfortable with it?
Yeah.
How did you fall into an eating disorder? What were you doing? How did you not see the signs and be man, this is not going to be good for me? Talk about that period, because there's probably a lot of young girls that'll end up hearing your story that you dropping insight right now can be very influential and impactful to them.
Yeah. It developed, I think basically just from coaches pushing me that I needed to go a lower weight class. Like, I was never a really skinny, like, little girl. I was always kind of, you know, chubby, and, like, I think people saw that and they're like, oh, well, she's so good if she just lost some weight or something. And then, like, I don't want to blame any of this on my dad, but, you know, he would, like, help me cut weight. He cut weight in high school. That's how you knew how to cut weight back then. And so, like, I was praised for losing weight pretty much. Not in a bad way, but, like, when you're that young, you're like, oh, losing weight is good, so I'm going to just keep losing more weight. And then I got to this point where it wasn't really about wrestling anymore. It was just kind of about how I looked, and I was always starving myself, even out of wrestling season, and things like that. So, and actually, like, the turning point was with football. Football saved me, because when I got into high school football, we were doing 2-a-days, and I couldn't survive off 500 calories a day. Like, so, yeah.
That's what I was about to say, is if you're training like a serious athlete, it is impossible. You'd literally black out.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be trying to go through a practice and you would just pass out because you do not have fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So by having to do 2-a-days and training really hard, you were like, I have to eat. There's no choice. It doesn't matter what these people might be saying or the pressures I might be feeling. If I don't have fuel, I can't do this.
Yeah.
So just like that, you got it back on track. You were able to just bounce out of an eating disorder just by...
Not really. That kind of saved me from a really, like, dark path I was going down. Like, I remember getting into a nutritionist, and he told me I was underweight, and I was like, yeah, what's wrong with that? Like, I'm underweight. Like, I'm not overweight. But...
So your perceptions were distorted.
Yeah.
Because a little kid can't really rationalize through that. You're like, yeah, that's a great thing, right? And he's like, no. Like, you need to eat.
Yeah.
100%. And we have... it happens very often, even with athletes in here, where they want to drop down to a lower weight class, and I find out they're eating like 1,100 calories a day, trying to do 3 sessions a day. I'm like, dude, you're doing the exact opposite. You're damaging your metabolism so much. You're giving your body no fuel to work off. You're looking at this problem incorrectly. Your brain wants to simplify it to just like, I just eat less, and that means, you know, I'll lose weight and be healthy. And it's not that simple. It's so much more complicated than that, which obviously you know now. But as a young girl, you couldn't really rationalize that the right way. What made you really flip the switch to go like, no, I need to be eating. I need to be taking care of my body. You know, how do you get out of that image? Because if you're getting praised for the wrong things, if you're getting praised for like, oh, you lost some weight, you look skinny, and now all of a sudden that's in your brain like, oh, I just have to do this, I have to do that. It can take you, like you said, down a very dark path. How did you really get it back together?
I mean, I really didn't figure it out until about my sophomore year of college. So I kind of battled that throughout all of high school. It just got better. I wasn't starving myself like out of season when I got to like be in high school, and I actually got quite overweight out of season, and then I would be dropping like 25 pounds every season. So
it was an ongoing battle for multiple years.
Yeah. Yep.
Wow. So let's start to talk about the success and the accolades that are coming in high school. You know, your first couple really big tournament wins. Like, I don't know if the Nationals was the first time, or there's probably tournaments before that where you were like, wow, like I just won something substantial. And then how did that affect your psychology and your goals and your dreams? Because they start becoming more attainable. It starts being like, whoa, like not only do I want to do this, I think I can do this. Let's talk about the success that you're having. You know, is your brother continuing to wrestle all the way through high school with you? Do you just do you take the torch? And I don't mean this in a bad way, but sometimes one person just excels more and it casts a shadow over somebody else. But that never means that like you should go as big and as bright and as bold as you can in your life. You know what I mean? And try to pull the people you love up with you, but you should never diminish that flame if someone else is not on the same level. So kind of talk to me through the high school when the success really starts coming, and that's probably reinforcing like, I am going to wrestle in college. I am going to be this. Take us through that story.
So my freshman year, we had like JV practice and varsity practice. So I was at JV practice, and I remember hating that. I was like, why am I here? I'm teaching people, and I'm like, I'm better than this, whatever. But so I wrestled JV all that year, and I remember I had a wrestle off, and I won, and so I got to wrestle my first varsity tournament that year, and that really made me excited for like to continue wrestling in high school. And then
real quick,
yeah.
most people that are not in the wrestling community do not know what wrestle-offs are. That doesn't mean anything to them. I think we should talk about that because it's an amazing part of the sport because it allows the people that earn something to get it versus a lot of society is like, oh, well, they were here first, so they're the person that gets to represent. Explain what wrestle-offs are and then explain that wrestle-off match, what that meant, because I know what that means, but anyone outside of the wrestling community, they have no idea how pivotal and important that was. You don't win that match, you have an entirely different season that year. That one match was so important.
So a wrestle-off is when there's a varsity wrestler and you like wrestle them in the middle of practice or whenever it's set up, and if you beat them, then you basically get the varsity spot. And I had lost that wrestle-off multiple times that year already. He was actually my boyfriend at the time in high school.
No
so,
way.
Yeah.
I am so glad I asked about this story. It is not even funny. Because I was thinking to myself, like, people don't realize how pivotal that is. I mean, imagine, I want the people that are listening, imagine if you had a spot on a team. You were the varsity starter. Let's say you're a sophomore or you're a junior or a senior, and a freshman is coming in, and they're on JV. But you have to wrestle to keep your spot. And if they beat you, they take your varsity spot until the next wrestle-off. It was your boyfriend.
Yeah.
Zoe, we got to go into this, okay? So I had no idea. So, are you a freshman at this point?
I'm a freshman, yeah.
So you're a freshman. Is he a freshman?
Sophomore.
Ooh, the dagger cuts deeper. Okay, so you're a freshman. How long have you guys been dating?
Like 6 months.
I'm just trying to
at
really
this point.
okay.
Yeah,
Trying to really
like
build the
6
story.
months, yeah.
So you're in the same weight class. So you're on the same team. You're the JV. He's the varsity.
Yeah.
He's beaten you at multiple wrestle-offs.
Like 1 or 2 before that, yeah.
Got it. You go out for this wrestle-off. Explain it. You win it. Does that change anything? Go into that period a little bit, and then going out to that tournament now representing varsity. What nerves came with that, or what excitement? Like, after we talk about that point, tell me about how that experience was, because now you are what you thought you should be. Like, you know what? I belong in this spot. Tell me about this period. I'm so glad I asked about wrestle-offs.
Yeah. It actually didn't put much like strain on anything. So he took it well. Yeah. I think I was the one who didn't take it well when he would beat me, honestly, because he was wrestling like less years than me, and I'm like, why are you beating me? And it made me so mad. But then I won this wrestle-off, and I always thought, like, yeah, I definitely won that. But then, like, a few months later, I was like, did you let me win that? And he's like, no. And I don't know if he let me win or not. I don't think so. But I remember being so excited. And after I had the wrestle-off, like, I called my mom. I'm like, guess what? I got the varsity spot. Like, I'm going to be wrestling varsity this weekend. So, yeah, and that tournament, I did not do good. It was, like, one of the hardest tournaments of the year. Not when I look back on it, but I didn't do good. I think I didn't even win a match. I had 3 matches, and I lost all 3.
But you got to go out on varsity, and you got to wrestle with the best people out there now. So, I mean, that's the beautiful thing about wrestling is that can be the kid that started wrestling at 4 years old all the way up to the point of where they are now in high school, and you're facing them in a tournament. Varsity, there is no higher than that. You're wrestling the top wrestlers in your area at that weight. So you're on varsity there. You continue to wrestle. Do you end up losing a wrestle-off to your boyfriend again and he takes the spot back, or do you maintain the varsity? Just keep walking me through the story.
I think the next tournament was like districts. And he had been winning all year. He'd had the varsity spot all year, so I didn't go. He got chosen over me. So, which, fair. So, because I didn't do good in my varsity tournament. I mean, he had been having success, so.
Got it. So you conceded that spot. You said, hey, you go out there, you represent. All right, so that gets us through your freshman year. When does the success really start to come for you? Is it sophomore year? Is it junior year? And what changes did you make that started yielding the success? Like, try to give us the insight to how like I said, you became a national champion in high school, right? To go from the girl that goes out to a wrestling tournament at varsity for the first time and gets beat every single match to becoming the national champion, that is a major leap. What caused that leap? What influences? What changes did you make in your life, et cetera? Let's build us through that.
So I think my success really did start my sophomore year of high school. I remember preseason, there was a lot of War of the Roses tournaments, and I was going all over the country with Brent and doing all that.
No, it had to be a blast. You're traveling around the country. You're competing all over. You're with a team of girls. You're probably having an amazing time. Yeah, those are good experiences.
Yeah, it was great. And actually, I had wrestled a couple high school tournaments, and then we went to a tournament in Colorado where I wrestled a girl who was way above my skill level, probably too big for me, but Brent was like, I want you to have an exhibition match with her. And I had separated my shoulder. So then I was out for 6 weeks. But I remember every day at practice, I was riding the bike the whole practice, like riding the bike for 2 hours, because I couldn't run because my shoulder's in a sling. And I really remember, like, that motivated me, being hurt and, like, seeing everyone practice. And I was like, man, I hate cutting weight. Like, sometimes I hate wrestling. I'm like, no, I love wrestling. Like, I'm here every day still. I'm riding the bike. Like, I'm here learning, getting better.
Like, I would be out on that mat if I could. So when I can get back out there, I'm going to be out there. Mm-hmm. So it was very motivating for you. It wasn't as discouraging as people would think it would be.
Yeah, not really. I was definitely sad, but that was, like, motivating being sad. Yeah, so then I came back, did a few JV tournaments just to get me going, and then I dropped weight to, like, 119 that year. And I had a wrestle off, and I lost for the 125 spot. But then he's like, I'm going to drop you down to 119, and, like, you're going to go. Like, you need to go. You've been working so hard. I see how hard you're working. You need to go to districts. So I went to districts that year, and I didn't make it out of districts or anything. But then I had girls tournaments. I had a lot of success there. And come my junior year.
So you're wrestling year-round at this point, too. Yeah. Like, in the summer, you're wrestling. No matter what, wherever you can find wrestling, you're wrestling.
Yeah, so I played softball my freshman and sophomore year. But I was still wrestling. I would go to softball practice, and then right after softball practice, I was going to our, like, off-season wrestling practices. So, yeah, I was wrestling all year.
You were just grinding. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So now you're going in your junior year, and how does the junior year look?
Yeah, junior year, I kind of cut a lot of weight again. I was on varsity all year. So that year, I was on varsity. Like, I had a good record. My brother came into high school that year, so that was cool. That was a cool year.
So you guys are in the same room again. You're wrestling together. That probably really fires you up again. Now, his sister's on varsity, and, like, that's a cool thing. Are you still in the same relationship at this point? Are you still dating the same guy? Had that fallen apart?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, you guys are still so you still have that tight-knit bond. You're both wrestling. Wrestling's at home. Wrestling's in a relationship. Wrestling's in every aspect of your life, right? Your life is wrestling, right? So junior year, how do you end up finishing? What lessons do you pull from it? Were there any really powerful moments in your junior career or junior year? Because senior year is where you win the nationals, right?
Yeah.
So something big changes in this point.
Yeah. So I remember doing really well my junior year, but there wasn't really any, like, pivotal moment. I did well at districts. I think I lost in the blood rounds or something like that, but I didn't make it out of districts. I think the biggest moment was I remember being in Oklahoma City at Folkstyle Nationals, which I won my second year, and I had never not All-Americaned at that tournament. Like, I went there 8th grade year, 9th grade year, 10th grade year, I All-Americaned. In my junior year, I didn't. I lost in the blood rounds, and I remember not even feeling, like, disappointed. I'm like, I was like, didn't have it in me or something. I don't know. And I never knew this, but lately my dad had been telling me that he remembers that year, and he remembers me feeling like I always had so much heart, and he felt like I had given up. And Brent actually said the same thing. So
can you trace why? Come on, you got it. Why?
I think it was because of the cutting weight, to be honest. I think I was, like, always, well, I'm a part of wrestling and I have to wrestle. But I think I was just tired. I think it was just
a little
too
broken
much.
Down. Your spirit was kind of weighed down. You just didn't have that same drive. You had beat on yourself for a long enough period that a little bit of your spirit was just like, you know what? Wherever I get to, I get to. Oh, I lost there. It's okay. Versus that's never the girl that you were before that. You were very fiery.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that was a big moment. And I remember we have World Team Trials, like, every May. And so I was supposed to go to that, and I was telling one of my coaches, I'm like, I'm not going. And he's like, well, you should go. Like, you're going to do so good. You should go. And I'm like, I'm not going. I don't want to go. And I remember he made me feel really bad about it, but I'm glad I didn't go, because then I took, like, a pretty long break, which I needed. And as a kid in high school, I was like, I just got to wrestle year-round, and that'll make me good. I didn't realize the weight of needing rest and needing to stop. So
This is huge. I would have never thought that was like the turning point or that's what made you better. But stopping, pressing the like pause button for a little bit, letting your spirit recharge, getting your mind back, not being overwhelmed, because you probably wouldn't have classified yourself as overwhelmed all the time, but you were. You had been going, all gas, no break, and you needed that rest. So how long of a period do you rest? What changes? And then what is your mindset like when you come back into it? Because you're probably reinvigorated. You're fired back up again. It's your senior year. Let's build that story.
Yeah. So I rested pretty much all summer. Like, I wasn't going to play softball that year. I ended up playing softball. And I just remember focusing on softball, really. And then I started wrestling back up again, when like school started and preseason stuff and all of that, because I wasn't playing football or anything that year. I was just getting ready for wrestling. And I think I was most excited because I had a really close relationship with my high school assistant coach, and he was telling me, you could make 112 this year and you could do really good at 112, and I can't wait to see you get there. And I competed at Fargo the summer before, and I got close to like the 112 weight class. I'm like, man, I'm so excited for this year. I'm gonna do so good. Yada yada.
You almost had like a new goal, a new target, something to chase again that might yield a whole new level of success. So you were fired back up. Going into your senior year, you were pretty excited to wrestle again.
Yeah, very excited. And my brother was a sophomore at that point. Yeah, so he had some success. So it was just exciting for both of us, and I think that helped, that it was exciting for both of us. All
right, start to build your senior year for me. How in the world do you become national champion?
Yeah, so my brother and I were about the same weight class. We were training partners. I was super excited. We had this plan. Like, I was going to wrestle 119 most of the year, and then for postseason, I was going to potentially drop to 112, and super excited. So we have this kid. We were at CrossFit one day because we did CrossFit for, like, training, and one of the kids that didn't really like me, he came up to me, and he's like, "You're going to lose your spot." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, this kid from Indiana, he won state. He's super, super good, really good, and he's coming to take your spot at 119. And I'm like, this is a story. We're in the middle of the season, almost to the middle of the season. Like, this kid's coming from Indiana is going to take my spot. Like, you just hate me. Just be quiet. And sure enough, this kid from Indiana who's super, super good came in at the 119 spot. And I'm crying and I'm sobbing. I'm like, this is my senior year, and I'm not going to even wrestle varsity. And my coach is like, stop. Take a break. Like, this will work out. You've worked so hard these past 4 years. Like, I'm not going to let that happen to you. And I was just kind of like, okay, whatever. But it worked out. He wrestled a lot at 125, and I wrestled at 119 and really never lost my spot. So that was cool. That was good. And I had a lot of success that year in boys wrestling. And actually, I dropped to 112, and I made it out of districts, which my goal is to make it to regionals that year. And I'm like, cool, like, this is my goal. Like, I'm going to win a match at regionals. Like, that's my next goal. And then I made it out of regionals into boys state. So
I didn't even know that. You made it to boys states. That is crazy. As a senior, wrestling other seniors that have wrestled their whole lives. Wow.
Yeah. And my brother and I were in the same weight class. So that was cool. That was a super, super fun year.
And honestly, in this weird way, this figure from Indiana that's coming in to take your spot, it almost really attached you to how important wrestling is to you. Because it's like, oh my God, this might get taken away from me. And then when it didn't, you're like, you've refound, like, you love to wrestle. This isn't what you have to do. You want to be the girl that's out there wrestling. And when you're operating from that spirit, it's completely different than being like, like, I got to wrestle. I have to do this. That wasn't you at all. So as somebody that doesn't understand what the national tournament for women is like or anything like that, when does that come in? Is that after boys states? So like you make it to boys states, you got to be feeling like a rock star. Before, you hadn't got out of districts. You got out of districts, you got out of regionals, you get to the state tournament for men, which is massive, right? So that they make it an event. There's a lot of people there. It's in a stadium, usually. I don't know if it was in a stadium at that point.
It was at Ford Field.
Yeah, so it's at Ford Field. You really are feeling like a superstar at that point to be a senior in high school wrestling at Ford Field. The state tournament ends. Does nationals happen quickly after that? Just kind of build me up to the national tournament for girls. what your thoughts were going in, how you thought you were going to do, et cetera. And then we got to talk about like what that was like to win a national tournament.
Mm-hmm. I think boys state was in the beginning of February, and nationals was always at the end of March. So I think that was the lapse there. And so leading up to that, like you said, I was on top of the world. Like I went 0-2 at state, but I put the state champ on his back. Like that was my first match. So that was really exciting. Like I was all hyped up from that. And I'm like, if I could do that there, then I can do whatever I want here. So I was nervous from the year before because like I said, I didn't even All-American. I All-American to that tournament every year and I didn't All-American. And I just went into it with like...
What was the highest you'd ever placed before your senior year going back to the national tournament?
I think 5th. So, yeah, 5th. But I went into that tournament kind of with nothing to lose.
And you're feeling like a rock star. You just went to boys states, faced the returning state champ, and gave him a match. Mm-hmm. That shows you the caliber of a wrestler that you are. It is possible that you can go and win this tournament. You go in with nothing to lose. Walk me through that tournament, and then we got to talk about the victory, what it was like for the family, how that fired you up, where you decided to go to college to wrestle. We'll build that chapter.
Yeah, so I remember my semifinals match. I had wrestled that girl before, and I lost to her pretty badly. But I went into it, and I was confident. And I'd never been like that before. I'm like, oh, I wrestled this girl before, and she beat me, and she's going to beat me again. Just because my mind wasn't developed enough at that point.
Yeah, why was it different this time? Because that is massive. If athletes could figure out how to get this thing in line, our greatest weapon and strength is right in here. But most people, they cut themselves down before they even go into the difficult matches, and they look at someone and go, oh, they're better than me, and then they already lost. Mm-hmm. They might as well just walk out on the mat, shake their hand, and say thank you for beating me, because you beat yourself. Why was it different? Why were you wrestling with nothing to lose? You still had everything to lose. You still could have placed terribly low at this tournament. What was really different?
Yeah, I don't know. I remember just going in thinking like I'm the strongest and I'm definitely capable of beating this girl. She beat me last year, and this is a new year. Like I've done so much this year. I had such a good record with like boys season. I've had great training partners that have lifted me up, and that was kind of my mindset going into that. So I beat her, made the finals. That was crazy enough in itself.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, so you win that match over that girl. Just give me some emotion. What is it like? What is your coach thinking? Is your dad and mom there?
My dad, yeah.
Your dad's there. You just beat a girl that was supposed to beat you. Mm-hmm. On paper, she was supposed to come out and crush you again, and she was going to go to the finals. You had never placed above 5th before. You beat this girl. What are you feeling? What do you, et cetera? And then going into the finals match, did pressure kick in? Were you still just like, you know what? I can win this tournament.
Mm-hmm. That was super exciting. I remember calling my mom, and I was so excited that I was in the finals, and she's like, oh, I wish I could be there. Yeah, I just remember being excited. And then my finals match, I remember kind of doubting myself when I saw her. She was just like a super jacked girl, and I was like, oh my gosh, and just kind of freaking out. But it was fine. I think I went into it with, I could have had more confidence, but I was better than her, and just technique-wise, and yeah, it was a grinder. It was like 3-2 or something like that.
So you had a war. Mm-hmm. You win the tournament. Mm-hmm. The second you get your hand raised in the nationals, talk about that moment. Ref grabs your hand. You just won. You just beat the girl where your eyes went, oh my God, I don't know if I... Mm-hmm. Your hand gets raised. You are the national champion, Zoe. Mm-hmm. Zoe Nowicki is the national champion. Explain that moment to me.
I remember crying. I was crying. I ran off the stage, and I jumped into my dad's arms, and we just sobbed, and I was like, I wish he could be here, meaning Brent. Like, because Brent had died the year before, and I'm like, I wish he could be here. And that was the first thing I thought, because that whole year was like, I'm doing this for Brent, like with women's wrestling. Like, Brent, he always loved me. He saw me as a hammer, and that was a huge motivator too, doing it for Brent. So
I actually think Brent might have been the first person to ever bring you in here.
He was. That's the reason I'm here.
Yeah, I was going to say, me and Brent had met. We had lunches together and talked a ton of times. He had ran practices here. You met us because of Brent.
Yeah, the first time I came here was, I think you guys were in Fowlerville. I don't remember where the location was, actually. It was in a different location. It was at the female mega camp, and he brought me in to wrestle.
That was in Brighton. It was across from Brighton Chrysler. We had
Okay.
the cage right there, and then we had the mats next to it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was my first time here, and I didn't even really he's like, you got to come wrestle with these girls. I'm like, what? Why? Like, why are you making me come wrestle here? Like, I don't even know why. And that's where I met Molly there. I think I met Bobby there, but we didn't talk much there. So
Yeah, the female mega camp was an amazing thing for the people listening. We had a girl flying from Ireland, Finland, England. Bobby was a professional fighter at the time. Like, we had girls from all over that were these incredible female athletes, and you got to come in and, you were like 16 or...
I think I was 14.
Or, you were young.
I was really young.
So you're at 14, and you're going in and wrestling with these adult female athletes, and that's got to build you up a little bit. Like, these are professional fighters, and like, I'm in here once you got in the room.
Yeah.
So, man, what an incredible way to end your senior year. Now, how do you choose Adrian College? Give me the post story after nationals. What happens in your life? What your family is like? What you feel differently like now as you are the national champion. Just how did life change? And then build for me the college part of your story.
Yeah. So I was looking at 2 colleges pretty hard, Adrian and then Campbellsville. And at the time, Campbellsville they had been national champions. Like, they had a lot of success. So I was kind of bouncing between those 2. Campbellsville was in Kentucky. I kind of wanted to stay close to home. Like, my heart was telling me I wanted to stay close to home. Never would have admitted that back then, but I'll admit that now. No, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, and I remember they were super interested in me in there. I went for a visit. I talked to the coach. And I ended up staying at Adrian because there was a new program developing there. I knew the coach there already, and I knew he cared about me and wanted to see me succeed. I loved the campus. I liked that it was close to home. And actually a huge thing was I liked that it was close to here, the gym, because at that time I was really wrestling a lot with Christy Garr, Alicia, and all of those girls. And I was like, I don't really want to leave that. Like, I like doing jiu-jitsu in the summer. Like, I like
You just got an
training
awesome
MMA.
home base.
Yeah.
You got a little bit of everything you need in one spot. And your family is close by.
Yeah. And Adrian was one of the best schools as far as schooling went. So that's why I chose Adrian. Yeah.
So now tell me about your college career. So you are the high school national champion coming in, so you already have a little bit of weight to your name, power. Did they already have a solid female wrestling program when you went in? Because you said it's a newer program. How long have they been running? How did the team embrace you? And what was different about college wrestling versus high school? How were you different? And then you ended up winning a national tournament again in college, which is massive. So kind of build me through your college days.
Yeah. I went in super confident, knowing, because I had wrestled college age girls before, and I had beat them. So I'm like, oh, I can do this. Like,
and
I'm
like
ready
you said,
for
you're
this.
coming in and wrestling with Christy Garr, who's an animal wrestler. You were wrestling with Alicia, who was, top 6 in the country. Like, so you're regularly around girls, and you know that, like, okay, I can compete with these people. I know what the elite level is like. I just won a national tournament. I was at men's states. Like, I belong here, which is a totally different presence. You're there, like, I know I can compete at this level.
Yeah. That's how I entered, and I'm glad I did, with all that confidence. So college wrestling is a lot different. The season's a lot longer, and you wouldn't think so, because everyone says, well, wrestling season is long. And you're like, yeah, I know it's long. Well, it's different in college. Yeah, sure it is. That was like my mindset. But I went into it, and I had not as much success as I wanted my freshman year. I really burnt myself out. I was cutting like 10 pounds a week. You weigh in at the tournament. You don't weigh in the night before. There was just a lot of differences. I didn't really have that much success my freshman year.
You had to learn the processes too.
Yeah.
You had to learn like how to really fit in this new thing that wasn't what you were used to. You thought you knew going in, but you really didn't know how different it was going to be. So how do you click with your teammates? How do you click with the coach there? How does the program develop and grow? And then what was different as you're going into your sophomore year? Do you really start to get the hang of how college wrestling works? And for the people that don't know, like me, what was the major differences between a college wrestling room and a high school wrestling room? Obviously the level, but other than that, what was different?
I clicked really well with my teammates. I loved all of them.
That's huge.
Yeah, that was a huge thing throughout the whole 4 years. There was never really any drama. Like, my teammates and I just really got along, which I was nervous about because I didn't like softball for that reason. Like, I just didn't like petty girls, and I was afraid any girls' team was like that, but it wasn't. So that was good. I love my coach. But I had a hard time with that my freshman year because the practices were run very technical. Like, we did a lot of technique. There wasn't a lot of conditioning. It was a lot on your own. And I never understood that. You know, you're used to a room where you grind in high school, and like all you do is conditioning and all you do is live wrestling. And I didn't understand why we didn't have that. I'm like, why is it not like this here?
We're not working hard enough.
Yeah. So that made my freshman year really hard for me, and all that cutting weight actually almost didn't come back my sophomore year. So.
Wow, just because the experience was so different. And in your mind at the time, you're probably like, I'm not getting what I need. Mm-hmm. I'm not getting the way that it should be done. Well, that's just because it's all you were familiar with. Mm-hmm. Because honestly, I always thought the college wrestling room was just grind, like Iowa wrestling. Like, I thought that's what college wrestling rooms are like. Your wrestling room was not like that. It was very technical. It was trying to clean up the nuances and make your techniques more effective. And they just expected that if you made it here to college wrestling, that you know how to be in shape and you know how to condition yourself. Mm-hmm. But that puts way more pressure on you because that's not the coach running you through the practice. That's being like, make sure you're in shape, make sure your cardio is there, make sure your weight is on point. We're going to sharpen your wrestling. Mm-hmm. Why did it change your sophomore year? Why all of a sudden because you said it was different. You were like, oh, I accepted it. You saw some type of improvement. Why did it change as you went on? What made you go back to wrestling? You said you almost quit.
What made me go back was I was helping coach the high school team at Fargo. Fargo is like one of the biggest freestyle tournaments, and I helped with that process all summer long. And I was like, I love this sport. Like, I can't leave this sport. This sport is part of me. Like, I was an athlete.
But you were really close. You were actually close to quitting because it sounds like you were rationalizing to yourself to make yourself go back. Mm-hmm. So that means you were close to giving up.
Yeah. I was wanting to transfer actually, and then I didn't end up transferring. I'm like, my coach cares about me. You know, he does care about me, and I think I started learning. At that point, I started learning like the value of rest and that you don't need to go 1,000% and go live every single day. And I'm like, maybe he's on to something, you know, maybe he knows what he's talking about. So, because I thought I knew everything as a freshman. So that was really how I rationalized it was I love coaching and I just can't leave this sport. It's part of me. I don't know how to leave this sport. So
tell me about the big moments in your college career. What were the good or bad?
Yeah.
Just moments that shaped you.
Yeah. So winning nationals my sophomore year was a huge moment.
You did it as a sophomore.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So there's like two different types of nationals, and there's WCWA, which is all the NCAA schools and NAIA schools together, and then there's the NCAA nationals. And I won the WCWA, so all the teams combined.
That one's even harder then, because that's all together? Or because I only ever think of the NCAA tournament. I had never heard of the WCWA tournament. But if it's just everybody in one pool, or would you not even say one is necessarily harder than the other? It's just a different event?
Yeah, it was a different event. And that year it was really weird because a couple teams had dropped, and they were like, it was like two big teams had dropped. So, I mean, some of the top, like 4 girls weren't even there. So I don't really think it was harder. I think it was easier. But it was still nationals nonetheless, and that was really exciting.
So now does that fire you back up because you accepted the new process from your coach? You stopped questioning everything. The freshman doesn't know everything about the world. You are blending in better with your coach and with your team. You win the national tournament. You got 2 years left. You know, what year is this, by the way?
This is 2020, and
that's what, because I was going to say we're approaching pandemic territory where that's going to level everything.
Yep. Actually, that tournament qualified me for Olympic team trials, so that was really scary when COVID came, because I was like, am I going to be able to even compete at that? Is there going to be an Olympics? So fast forward through kind of when COVID started, that summer was really, really hard. I gained a lot of weight, and I got really depressed. And then going to my junior year, there was nothing really of any like super like substance there. Again, my junior year, I All-Americaned, but I was just wrestling and I was getting better, and I could see the progress for sure. And then my senior year, was my mindset had changed a lot.
How so?
I knew how to take care of my body. I started working with Mary Vance, and she changed my mindset on like my nutrition and a lot of things like that. And that helped me a lot. I wasn't cutting any weight. I loved wrestling. I liked going to wrestling practice. Yeah.
You're just feeling so much better. Your body's operating the right way, which is making your mind better. You wrestled through your senior year. How did you end up finishing as a senior?
My record was 37-1. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You had an amazing record in senior year. 37-1. So so now as the senior year closes on college wrestling, there's like this what is next thing, because the only real next level that I'm aware of is the Olympics, is like you or World Team, right? So as your senior year's ending and you are deeply attached to the sport of wrestling, you love being a wrestler, you love the sport, you love coaching people, as your college year's coming to an end, is that a sad moment? Is that you know what I mean? Like, explain that part of your life to me, because it's everything that you are at that point. You are a wrestler, and now this chapter's coming to a close, and you're probably like, where did these 4 years go? Explain that period, and then we're going to start to talk about, kind of what we're working on now.
Yeah, it was very sad.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Very bittersweet, yeah. But I knew I wanted to be a coach, so that was kind of like my saving thing. I'm like, I'm always going to be around wrestling. But I was really focused on nationals, so that was good. I wasn't really focused on being sad. Like, I was focused on nationals, and I knew I could win nationals this year. Like, there was never a doubt in my mind. So that was good. And then I had a lot of coaches kind of hit me up. I had actually taken a job pretty much at a college, and then I ended up turning that down to come here because I wanted to start this MMA career.
You got to tell me about that. You got a job offer to coach wrestling at a college, and you were like, I got too many things that I have to do first. There's dreams that I still have. There's goals that I have. Tell me about that. That's a huge decision.
Yeah, it was a very hard decision. I had a few people reach out to me about being a GA or an assistant coach. And I could probably get a head coach position somewhere, but I'm not ready for that, so I didn't even pursue that. But I had gotten a really good GA job, and I thought I was excited for it. It was in Adrian, and it was with a coach that had, brought me up through the years. We were super close, and I knew we would work well together. But I was like, I don't want to be a coach. I'm 22. This will help me with competing through wrestling, but I want to do more. I'd always wanted to do MMA. I kind of gave up on that dream a little bit with, around my sophomore year, I started powerlifting, and I was like 150, and I'm 5'1", 150 pounds. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to fight MMA. Like, I can't lose this weight. I'm sick of cutting weight my whole life. I don't want to be an MMA fighter. But then, like I said, when I worked with Mary, that changed a lot. I'm like, well, maybe I can do MMA. So.
And you've been in an environment now, because for the people that didn't catch on to this earlier in the story, when you were 14 and when you came to the female mega camp, you were surrounded by MMA females and girls that went on to be fighting in Rio de Janeiro and Ireland. And like Molly right now, I think is ranked top 10 in the world. She just got signed by Barstool Sports. She got a 6-figure deal with Barstool. She's crushing it with the UFC. She just had one of the most viral knockouts in UFC history with that spinning back elbow. She's going to make millions of dollars. And it's like, you've trained with that girl. You've put in work with that girl on the mats. You've seen Bobby fight around the world in the UFC. You saw Alicia became the number 1 ranked MMA fighter in the country, the world champion. If she had been at 115, she would have been UFC world champion. She's just 105. So they didn't have that in the UFC. So you've already seen, because to a lot of people, it's a dream that they're like, I can't achieve that level. You're a multiple-time national wrestling champion. Wrestling is the most dominant sport going into MMA. Like, it's the strongest base you can have. You've seen all these girls achieve this super high level of success. So that doorway is a lot more open in your mind than for most people. You're like, I can do this. So when you're thinking about this college offer, what's running through your mind that really drives you in the direction that says, no, first I have to pursue my dreams? Because most people, right when they get to that point of where you're at in your story and they get a certain offer, even if it comes with a lot of comfort and it comes with a lot of this, they do go that direction. It's just like, well, okay, that sounds great. I'll make some money. I love that you still have the fire. You're still a competitor. You're like the best advice I could give you is like your 20s should be take on the world. Accomplish the greatest feats that you can accomplish. Become something that's memorable and something that someone that makes an incredible impact, and you can coach for the rest of your life. Like the only reason I believe I'm the coach I am now is because my late teens and my early 20s, I went all in on me. I went all in on my competition and trying to be my best and fighting around the world and acquiring what I needed to really be an amazing coach. You'd be a good coach now, but in 5 years or 10 years, you'll be an unbelievable coach in whatever avenue you choose to pursue. So actually, I guess you don't even really need to dig into that much because it sounds like we're on the same page. Like that's kind of what drove your decision. You're like, I'm still in my early 20s. I need to go further.
Yeah. And I knew I was comfortable. I knew making that decision I was comfortable. I have my own house in Adrian. I had bought my own house, and I'm like, I'm already here, and that's kind of what I saw it as. I'm like, I'm just doing this because it's comfortable, and I know I'll be a good coach. Yeah, exactly.
That's the opposite of most people, though. Most people, that comfort is like, oh, this is easy. I'll just make this choice. You're just not like most people. You're like, no, I'm going to go bigger. So now you start training into MMA. Like for the people that don't know, if you're listening to this podcast for the first time, Zoe is focusing on making her MMA debut. But you don't know that she's already been training MMA for multiple years. Like through the summers, you would come here and do jiu-jitsu. You would train MMA. You actually did a fight simulation. How old were you when you did that fight sim?
18.
Yeah. Okay.
18.
So I won't name the girl because, but at the time you're 18 years of age. You're wrestling. Were you still in high school or were you in college when you did that one?
I might have been 19 because I remember it was the weekend I got back from spring break. My freshman year spring break.
Okay, so you might have been 19, but we had a girl who trained at a different gym. She would stop in here from time to time, but she was really out of a different gym. A professional fighter that was training for a fight at Madison Square Garden. Like she was training for a fight in Madison Square Garden, and I didn't have anyone to do a fight sim against her, and I was like, I just don't have anybody the right weight class or the right fit. And then I'm like, wait a second, Zoe is about her size. Like we brought you in. You had no real striking experience at all.
I didn't even really know what was going on. You're like, you're doing a fight sim. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, like, just go in there and it's like, a big practice. And I remember her coming in, they're like Vaselining up her face. And I'm like, James, what is this?
So literally, Zoe, with basically just her wrestling and a little bit of jiu-jitsu, went in and did a fight simulation, a simulated fight. She went in the cage, door shuts, and you did 3 rounds. And at the end of the 3 rounds, you would have won. Like if there was a referee and there was judges, you just faced a professional fighter female who has been training for like 5, 6, 7 years, and you beat her. And I remember at the end of that being like, "Oh, great job, you did awesome work." I remember that night I was like, how in the world does a girl that has almost no real jiu-jitsu yet, no striking yet, just dominate a professional fighter? That was a huge moment for me being like, man, I mean, wrestling is that dominant, but it was also a huge testament to you because you were in some bad positions. She was going for some submissions. She had hit you a couple times and you just went through her. You were just a hammer. Like Brent had said to that young girl, like you're just a hammer, and you just bullied her in the ring. And like I said, would have won the fight against a girl that was heading off to Madison Square Garden to compete. And I'm like, this girl is incredible. So then basically, to fast forward the story a little bit, let's talk about the point where how we really get you in again and start training now for your MMA debut. I mean, you're with Ty now. Let's talk about, your relationship at this point in life. You're now training for an MMA debut. Let's talk about some of your goals coming up. Just anything that you'd like to capture about the MMA story, because this will be super cool to reflect on like 2 or 3 years from now.
Yeah, I was actually telling Ty I'm excited for that, to like see this podcast in a couple years, and if I do another one, just to see how things change. So I am excited for my MMA debut because I feel super confident about my ability. And going into wrestling, I was young and I wasn't ever really confident. So I'm just really confident for this, and that's exciting.
And what is it like having trained with people who have achieved some of the highest levels of success? Like the people I was just listing off. You see a girl getting a 6-figure contract deal with Barstool, being ranked top 10 in the world. You've seen Bobby fight all over the world. You've been on the mat with those people. So you realize they're just people. They're just martial artists. That's got to give you like a really strong sense of I can do this, because usually people do not pursue their dreams because they don't really think they're possible, or they look at all the reasons that they can achieve something, or all the things that separate them from where they are right now to the person that they would have to be. You don't really see a lot of those barriers. You understand that like hard work yields results. You understand that the people that are at the top are no different than you. They're just people that stayed a course after something. So talk about, I mean, just the mindset of how, is it easy for you to know that like, listen, I can do this? It might be difficult because it's going to take some time. I'm going to have to learn some lessons. I'm going to have to get strangled a bunch of times in jiu-jitsu. But like, you know you can do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was always that person who was like, I can't do this, or negative, or like shutting off my dreams, until I wrestled at Olympic team trials. And I was surrounded by all these great people that I'd seen in magazines and like growing up. And I'm like, I just stood behind Jordan Burroughs in weigh-in line. Like, this isn't luck. I didn't just get lucky and get here. So that was a huge turning point.
So the woman that sits here today, you have a completely different outlook on the world. You have a different outlook on yourself. You have a different mind. And you've built that through all the difficulty and trials and tribulations that have brought you to this point. So we should really quickly on the podcast capture, you had just had an injury and a setback at a massive tournament. Let's talk about that, and then let's talk about you're working through it. You know, you're keeping your mind right, and then let's set like some goals. Like, what do you want to accomplish before the end of this year? And that's kind of how we'll wrap this podcast up. And like you said, imagine if the 8th grade version of you could have heard a podcast from, you know, when you're a senior, how different you are. You know what I mean? If you would have shot a podcast in 8th grade about wrestling and then you got to hear it as a senior, you're going to go through that same transformation again. So this will be an incredible thing to look back on.
Yeah.
So like I said, let's talk about that moment that just happened, because I feel like it was a devastating moment, and then we'll talk about your goals for the rest of the year.
Yeah, so I was wrestling at U23 World Team Trials, which is just a step under senior. So there's senior World Team Trials, U23. And I was in the finals match, and within like the first minute of the finals match, I tore my hamstring, or I strained it really bad, and I couldn't continue. That was it. So that was really discouraging.
And what happens if you win this, by the way? So you're in the finals, and Ty had told me you had beat a girl that was like a world team medalist, or like you had already gotten through some incredible competition. You're in the finals, you take an injury, which your whole leg was black and purple when you came back to the gym. I was like, oh my God. What would have happened had you won that tournament? Does that put you into a certain thing? Does that open a certain door? Does that change your path? You know, and then let's talk about goals.
Yeah, so that would have put me to be like the first person for the U23 World Team. But I'm just kind of an alternate now. I get invited to the developmental camps and things like that, but I'm just an alternate now. I don't necessarily go to a tournament or anything. So that could have changed some things, because I definitely would have been traveling a lot more this summer, like I would have had to.
Sometimes things work out for a reason, girl. Sometimes, you know, like, because you're still going to get to be a part of the developmental side. If there's an injury for the first person, you're probably the one that steps in. But it's also going to allow you to dive fully into the journey that you're on right now. And MMA has opened a lot of doors for people that have never been there before. Like, wrestling, there's a certain pathway to the success at the absolute peak of the sport. MMA, if you are a dedicated athlete with a solid background, many people can make it to the top. Many people can fight around the world. Many people can make a career with a lot of money and sponsorship and notoriety. You know, so it's almost like, although this is a massive setback in the wrestling path, this might allow you to dive way more into the craft that you're pursuing now, which will yield more results, considering that, like, we're looking for you to debut by, like, July.
Yeah.
It's all going to depend on when you are physically healthy enough to debut. We had almost put you in a fight a couple weeks ago. I was calling Ty. I forget whose fight I was at. I was on the road with somebody, but we got an offer, and I looked at the girl, and I called Ty right away, and I'm like, listen, we need to go fight this girl. Like, Zoe will beat this girl. And then he told me he talked to you, and he's like, listen, she's fired up. Like, he's like, she wants to go fight this girl. And then the girl ended up not accepting. But that's how close we are. For the people that are listening to your podcast, you being healthy is the only switch we need to happen to have you ready to make your MMA debut.
Yeah, which is discouraging for sure, but it's also nice because I've had a really hard life transitioning from college to this kind of unknown place and getting a place to live and a job and like figuring out the actual like life things I have to do right now to build me up right now. So fixing my leg, but it's going a lot better than I expected because I couldn't even walk the first week, and now I'm doing kickboxing. So
let's talk about goals. That's how we're going to end up the podcast. You're a multiple-time national wrestling champion, which is a credential that's already going to terrify women when they're going to be fighting you because they're going to know, listen, if she gets her hands on me, I'm probably going to the mat. What do you see for yourself in your MMA future? What is Zoe Nowicki going to become? I want you to really talk about that on the podcast right now. Be bold. What are you going to become in MMA so that when we get to look back at this at 3 years, 4 years, 5 years later, like this is going to be an incredible moment. What can Zoe be in MMA?
Long term, I think I can be the very best, whatever that is at that point. UFC champion, Invicta, whatever. I really think I can be the best. And I know that's crazy to say without even having a debut, but I've had a fight sim. I've been in sparring with girls since I was, 16. So I know this is really what I want. I've trained a little bit. Like my dad did a little bit of fighting, and so I've been around it. Like I know what it's about. But I think I could be the best. So, and I have many goals to work up towards that. So
I believe so as well. I believe we're going to look back on this podcast when you're the number 1 ranked amateur in the state, and then we're going to look back at this podcast when you make your professional debut, and then we're going to look back when you get signed to a major organization, and then we're going to look back when you're getting a world title put around you and go, how did this happen? It just happened from the hard work. It happened from the self-belief. It happened from the dedication to sport. And life is going to throw you a lot of obstacles. Most people that have your level of capability, they don't reach the top not because of anything to do with them. It's always because life knocks them down. Life gives them pitfalls that they can't seem to get out of. If you can just find a way to dodge the traps and ride the roller coaster that's coming, like life is just this sometimes. And if you can stay the course when you're in your down moments, we're going to experience the incredible up moments. I know it for a fact. So Zoe, it was a pleasure having you, in studio today. And actually, you know what? There's one final thing I want you to say on the podcast. For all the young girls out there that are dreaming of, because you were the football player, you were the wrestler, you were the one that stood out. You were the woman that kind of refused to take no for an answer. The girl that would do a fight simulation, against a professional fighter. You're always the girl that's just willing to do things. Where does that come from, and what would you tell other girls, that have those type of dreams, that have those type of drive? What would you say to those people, or like, what makes you you?
Work ethic for sure, and like you said, just saying no. Just do everything that you're gonna have to step out of your comfort zone a little bit, but just do it. If you just commit to it and just do it, you'll see results. And you might think you know everything, but make sure you're taking in information your whole life. And don't expect because I'm good at the high school level, I'm gonna be so good at the college level. Just ride the waves, and it's okay if you're not a world beater as a freshman. Maybe you will be by a sophomore, and that's really how quick it can turn.
Your story is proof of that. Your first season, you won 1 match. You went on to becoming a multiple-time national champion who wrestled in college and is now pursuing an MMA career. That's incredible. You could have been the girl that after your first season, you only won 1 match. Your mind could have easily told you, like, you're not good enough. You can't do this. You suck. Give it up. You didn't. And neither did Helen Maroulis. And neither did some of the best people on earth. It's that persistence. It's that resiliency. It's that believing in yourself. And if you believe, man, I'm telling you what, for people at home, if you believe in yourself and you refuse to take no for an answer, you can do incredible feats. You can do things that will even blow yourself away and be like, how did that happen? Self-belief is a powerful tool.
Yeah, that's really when it changed for me, believing in myself, because I was not confident for a very long time. I think people see me and they're like, she's so confident, and I'm not all the time. So But
Do you really know when that flipped? Because I only know you as the confident girl. What really made you confident?
I don't really know. I think I started getting really confident my senior year. And I think it was just a lot of trusting in myself and not being dependent on, like, you know, my parents or anything or anyone else. It was just all me. So
You kind of just found yourself and you learned to believe in yourself and you said, hey, I can do it. It's
yeah.
as simple as, like...
Yeah, and when I take a minute to, like, I don't ever really step back and look at my accomplishments, but when I do that, it helped. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was the girl that did this when I didn't even believe that I could, you know, win a match at one point, or you know, when my first practice when I got wrecked, and I'm going, what in the world is this crazy sport? All the way to what you became. Well, if you can go through that type of transformation, where you are now to being champion of the world in MMA is probably less of a jump than what you've already gone through as the girl that had never wrestled to being a 2-time national champion. So it was an honor to sit with you today. I enjoyed the podcast very much, and I'm really excited to look back at this one day as we build through your journey. So
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.